Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Schenectady. My name is Robyn Salvin, she, her pronouns, please, and I am serving as your worship associate when I wrote this a couple days ago, I put in lovely morning. Uh, this morning, alongside the Reverend Lynn Gardner, she, they pronouns, please. We are so grateful you all chose to be here this morning, whether here in the Great Hall or in our Zoom sanctuary. Oh, I always look up for the Zoom sanctuary and then I'm blinded. Um, as we explore how our histories are shaped by the meaning we make of our experiences. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but we hope you will stay after the service for what I'm now calling the 7 C's: conversation, connection, curiosity, camaraderie, commiseration, companionship, and of course, coffee. If you are visiting us for the first time, please don't let that or me freak you out. We'd love for you to stay for a cuppa and get to know you a bit.
And now, let us become more aware of the earth that holds us and gratefully receive the gift of our next breath. Each breath, a chance to connect with our own beating hearts and all of life. This morning, Sarah Meixner and Dan Leonard will kindle our chalice, a symbol of Unitarian Universalism, as I share these words from Barbara Peskin. In this familiar place, listen. Listen to the sounds of breathing, creaking chairs, shuffling feet, clearing throats, and sighing all around. Know that each breath, movement, the glance meant for you or intercepted, holds a life within it. These are signs that we choose to be in this company, have things to say to each other, things that are not yet said, but in each presence, still trembling behind our heart's doors. These doors closed but unlocked, each silent thing waiting on the threshold between unknowing and knowing, between being hidden and being known. Find the quiet among these people and listen to it all. Breathing, sighs, movement, holding back. Hear the tears that have not yet reached their eyes. Perhaps they are your own. Hear also the laughter building deep where joy abides despite everything. Listen, rejoice, and say amen. Our reading this morning is from Karen G. Johnston, who is the minister of our congregation in Burlington, Vermont. Humans make maps of stars, choosing some stars, ignoring others, to project our imaginations onto the heavens. These maps shift over time, across cultures. Names change for the same assemblage of bright points: Drinking Gourd, Big Dipper, Plow, Lost Hunters, Saptarishi. Humans make constellations by connecting stars. Humans make meaning by connecting stories. Story to narrative to story. Some blaze bright, some are faint. Most are backdrop to the great and mundane human unfolding. Let us imagine the stories of our lives as a starry universe above our heads. As participants in this congregation, we are tasked and trusted to draw constellations in this, our beloved small universe. to hold this community's history with honesty, care, and grace. May the stories we connect draw constellations that reflect a shared ministry that calls the best in us.
When I was young, being able to watch movies on TV generally happened only once a week. Growing up near the Canadian border in the 1970s and 80s, we would be able to watch old movies on Canadian PBS on Saturday night at the movies with Elwie Ost, who was the host. And I thought that was hilarious as a child. They would show two movies each Saturday, and my sister Renee and I would often be allowed to stay up for the early one. This was before cable, before VCRs. It makes me very nostalgic. But there were two movies that would be shown on American TV once a year, usually around Easter for whatever reason. And we would make big plans to get comfortable in the living room with a bowl of popcorn, freshly popped stovetop, and a glass of pop. I'm from Western New York, to watch. Those two movies were, and those of you of a certain age can probably say it along with me, The Sound of Music and The Wizard of Oz. My little musical theater nerd heart loved them both. As a kid, The Sound of Music was a little bit of a mystery. I loved the music, obviously, and the grandeur of the sets and the costumes, and how cool was it that kids got to be in it. But I did not understand the politics of the story being told. I generally understood who were the good guys and who were the bad guys. Looking at you, Rolf. But for me, the story meant that a very musically talented family with too many kids got to get a mom who was cool but unusual due to her very short hair, unique compared to all the other ladies I'd seen on TV, and her very specific talent of being able to pull off a professional level marionette show on a moment's notice. The Wizard of Oz, however, was made for kids like me. Singing, dancing, cool costumes, and a very straightforward, definitely kids story. Right? Just for kids. Girl runs away from home because a Karen wants to kill her dog, gets caught up in a tornado, and lands in a fantasy land where she meets a cast of characters who all want things from a wizard and go demand them from him. Witches die. The group inexplicably falls asleep in a poppy field and are woken up by snow, and the little girl gets kidnapped and locked in a castle. Very kid oriented. And then 25 years later, I became a social studies teacher, and my interpretation of that fanciful musical completely changed. There I was, minding my own business, teaching U.S. history, when I came across some papers a former teacher had left behind about the populist era. All right, buckle in, people. I'm going in teacher mode. The populist era was generally 1880s to 1890s in the heart of the Gilded Age, with all the robber barons like Carnegie and Morgan and Rockefeller and Vanderbilt. It started as a social movement led by Midwestern farmers that developed into a political one, advocating for more government control of banks and railroads, secret ballots in elections, direct elections of U.S. senators, and the adoption of the silver standard instead of the gold standard, which would benefit farmers, industrial workers, and the common man. Well, a journalist by the name of Frank Baum from Syracuse, New York, went out to the Midwest to cover this movement and got completely enamored with it. He was taken in by the plight of the farmer against wealthy business owners and was really impressed with the man who became the political face of the party, William Jennings Bryan. Bryan was a great orator who delivered soaring speeches, including the Cross of Gold speech, decrying the gold standard on which the US dollar was based. But despite his dramatic orations and nomination to the US presidency by both the populist and Democratic parties in 1896, hasn't happened since, to have a third party nominated like that, he was unable to deliver the presidency to the populists for reasons that included not being able to convince industrial workers that he was their guy. And so the Populist Party died a quick death in 1896, and Frank Baum became quite disillusioned about it. And in 1900, 4 short years later, and right about the time a very cool Unitarian church was being established in Schenectady, New York, his story, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, was published. A children's story. Or was it? You see, many believe that The Wizard of Oz is an allegory or a story that has a hidden moral or political meaning within it to the populist movement. Now, listen, when I read The Scarlet Letter in 12th grade in English 200 years ago, I gave Mrs. Nicholson a really hard time about all the symbolism she was trying to sell us in that book. Sorry, Mrs. Nicholson. At a certain point, it was just too much for me. Like, really? See how Hester's skirts swayed to the right? That meant an avalanche was coming. No, sorry, not buying it. But come along with me and see if I can sell you this allegory with a newfound respect for Mrs. Nicholson. Okay, so the story starts off in black and white, even in the book, all very dull and boring there on that Midwestern farm until a tornado comes along and carries Dorothy, a common person with common sense, off to a much more exciting and colorful land. That tornado represents the populist movement, getting people excited about a better life. That populist movement makes Dorothy's house land on the Wicked Witch of the East, or the robber barons, squashing them. Along the way to Oz, Washington, D.C., to meet the wizard, President McKinley, to try to get home, Dorothy meets the Scarecrow, or a farmer who doesn't get enough credit for being smart. She also meets a Tin Man who had worked for the Wicked Witch of the East, the industry owners, who kept chopping off limbs to meet the owner's demands, and those limbs were replaced by tin until he wasn't even human. You know, without a heart. Then he met up with the Cowardly Lion. All bark and no bite. That's William Jennings Bryan. Gets people all riled up, but can't close the deal. If you read the book, he like makes scratches at the Tin Man and makes indents on the tin, but doesn't really ever make an impression. And they follow the yellow brick road to Oz, kind of like following the gold standard to Washington, D.C., where all the power is, and where they find the wizard who is just controlled by other people, like witches, with no real power of his own. But when he learns the Wicked Witch of the East is dead, he thinks he can regain his own humanity if he has the group kill the Wicked Witch of the West. The group is ultimately able to kill her with a bucket of water. Who does the Wicked Witch of the West represent? The destructive forces of nature that harm farmers. Those forces are finally tamed by water, irrigation, to farmers. And what finally saves Dorothy? Well, her slippers. But here's where you have to remember that a significant change was made when adapting the book to the movie in 1939. The director thought the slippers would really pop in this new Technicolor if they were sparkly red, much more than the color of the slippers in the book. Silver. That's right. The silver slippers would solve all of their problems, much like the silver standard would solve all the problems of those in the populist movement. So, what do you think? Who's with me? Do you buy it? Or are you a cynical Robyn Smith in Mrs. Nicholson's English class and just a rainbow too far? Isn't it funny how hearing a well known story that has been told for 126 years can get a whole new meaning when someone provides a different perspective? In this case, it doesn't make the original meaning wrong or canceled. It just means that perhaps there are more interpretations to the same words that can enhance the story or lend some more context to it. As UU's opening up to new interpretations speaks right to our values of pluralism as we celebrate diverse different experiences and transformation as we adapt to grow spiritually and ethically. We are asked to use our brains, hearts, and courage to live into these values.
Over the past couple of months, Wendy and I have offered some opportunities for folks to gather to engage with the framework from the UUA called Meet the Moment. This framework is designed to help congregations and other groups of Unitarian Universalists discern how to best use our shared skills and resources to address the needs and opportunities for their particular context and in this particular moment. The framework includes asking 3 guiding questions and begins with, what is the moment that we're in? Now, some would say that's kind of a ridiculous question to ask because the moment in which we find ourselves is so abundantly obvious. And as soon as folks start answering the question and listening to the responses of others, it can also become clear that it can be a really useful question after all. We can begin to realize that our understanding of what is happening and the meaning that we make of those situations is sometimes radically different. It reminded me of an activity from a class that I took on facilitating cultural change. For those for whom sight is available, I invite you to look at the picture being projected and notice what you see. Now I invite you to describe it out loud or to share in the chat if you're here on Zoom, and I'll repeat what I hear through the microphone.
Family.
A family, a Black family. Did I hear a drawing, a dog, and a painting or a drawing? A child and a child hugging a father? Barefoot? Okay. The man seems to be the focus.
There's just one woman.
There's just one woman. One person is in the background with their hands on their hips. There's 2 women. There could be 4 women. Okay. The focus of attention is on the male figure. The focus of attention is on the 2 kids. There appear to be 6 human-like figures. Thank you. Now, back when I first did this exercise, the facilitators of the training, Beth Zemsky and Phyllis Braxton, explained that all of our responses fell into 3 categories: describe, interpret, and evaluate. To describe is to say what you see or notice or experience. There's a black and white drawing with 6 human figures and a dog. To interpret is to say what you think you see or experience. It is a family with 3 adults and 3 kids and a little dog gathering in a home. To evaluate is to say how you feel or think about what you think you see. I think this is a very loving family and that the youngest child looks especially happy to see his uncle or father. Each of these, describing, interpreting, and evaluating, can be useful, but it's also important to be aware of which one we are doing. In our story for all ages this morning, Python was upset when his friend Iguana didn't respond to him when Python said good morning. Iguana didn't respond could be an accurate description of what happened. But Python didn't stop there. He quickly moved to interpreting and evaluating, and wrongly assumed that Iguana was angry and was plotting some mischief against him. Anyone else ever realized you'd made an incorrect assumption? When we are squeezed, when we are under stress, human beings tend to increase the speed with which we jump to interpret and evaluate. Being able to evaluate quickly can help us if we're being chased by a rhinoceros, but it can get us into trouble in daily human interactions. This is an invitation that in times of stress, of conflict or confusion, to slow down. Slowing down and checking in with others allows us to have more accurate descriptions, which leads to better interpretations. And our brains, our wonderful, complicated, diverse human brains, seek to make meaning, to make sense of our experiences, to make sense of the world around us and our understandings of God or not God. The yearning for meaning is part of why our ancestors gazed at the night sky, finding images of constellations, of stars, and passing on the chosen meanings to those who came after. Depending on which pieces of history we choose to focus on, which stories we tell, and how we interpret them, we can find and create different meaning for us today. As we've been celebrating the 125th anniversary of this congregation, it has felt important to honor some of the achievements, the times when folks worked together to help bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice, cared for one another, learned and grew together. It also feels important to name some of the harder stories, too. There have been times, sadly, when past ministers, staff members, and lay leaders in positions of authority have misused or abused their power, breaking the trust of those they serve and those with whom they are in covenant in this congregation. There have been cases of financial misconduct, ethical misconduct, and sexual misconduct. These abuses of power can create long-lasting symptoms in individuals and in the system, such as mistrust, undermining of leaders, and bullying. Thankfully, there are also ways to heal. Courageous truth-telling, steady boundaries, clear policies, honest, direct conversations, naming where and when harm has happened so that we can address healing together. We can make choices that help prevent future harm and protect those who are most vulnerable. When members voted to move to policy-based governance in 2017, that was both a sign that some healing had already occurred and created pathways for more transparent practices and a healthier system. This past week, many of us learned that Cesar Chavez caused harm to girls as well as to women in the United Farm Workers Movement. In sharing her story, Dolores Huerta said, I am nearly 96 years old, and for the last 60 years have kept a secret because I believed that exposing the truth would hurt the farm worker movement that I have spent my entire life fighting for. In describing the fuller truth of her story, Dolores Huerta is inviting us to interpret and evaluate what we have previously understood of history, very likely creating new meaning along the way. Since the story became public, some in the Latine communities have been calling for the many murals of Chavez to be painted over, for schools and boulevards bearing his name to be renamed after Huerta. The stories of the United Farm Worker Movement are being described, interpreted, and evaluated in different ways now. It can be both challenging and powerful to learn to hold the complexity of our histories. This ability can also help us build beloved community in the present, a community full of beautiful and complicated and imperfect people, which is the only kind of person I have ever met. Beloved community is not a fantasy or a fairy tale. It is created when we can show up with all of who we are, and we continue to do so, not with arrogance and greed, but honestly and humbly with grace and gratitude. Another truth about this congregation is that here, hundreds of people of many ages and identities have experienced a sense of belonging so powerful that they remember it fondly, even many years later, if they choose to move away. Decades ago, a young man named Tom attended the youth group, then called the Steinmetz Club. The large group met on Sunday nights, and some of you who were teens in the 60s were there. Tom was kind and brought his energy, curiosity, and sense of humor with him. The adults who led that group did what they could to create a welcoming space for all the youth who came. Tom, a young teenager, found friends, a sense of belonging, and a place where he could bring big questions. He went away to college, and no one that we have talked with remembers him having more contact with the congregation as an adult. Yet that formative time of connection and belonging in the Steinmetz Club seems to have meant a lot to him. When he created a will, he named UUSS as one of the many beneficiaries, each to receive an equal portion of his estate. Many of the people who Tom loved died over the years. And at the end of Tom's life in 2024, he left a bequest of $189,000 to this congregation, a congregation that meant so much to him as a teenager. We rarely know how our words or actions may make a difference in someone's life. When we create constellations of kindness, of caring, of connection, it is a beautiful thing, and maybe even life-saving, like the stars in the drinking gourd directing the way to freedom. When we show up, both when we are in need and also because someone else might need us that day. We help bring new meaning and integrity to ideas like beloved community and building the common good. Like the star-filled sky on a dark, clear night, the longer one searches for stories and meaning in our history and in our unfolding present, the more will appear. So let us hold this community's history with honesty, care, and grace. May the stories we connect draw constellations that reflect a shared ministry that calls out the best in us. Salam, shalom, ashe, amen, namaste, and blessed be.